Meet Clay. He wakes up feeling groggy in his New York apartment and gets confused as he notices his wife Amanda packing frantically. She starts venting about her stressful job and their shared anxiety, then drops the bomb that she's rented a house for an impromptu family vacation.
I figured if I made the reservation and packed our bags, it would eliminate most of the reasons to say no.
It's been a while since they took a break, so Clay's on board with the idea. On the drive, their son Archie is glued to his video games in the back seat, while Rose, their daughter, is absorbed in watching Friends on her tablet. Amanda looks visibly relieved as they leave the bustling city behind. When they finally arrive at a spacious house in a quiet, remote area, it's a breath of fresh air. The kids waste no time and jump into the pool, and Clay can't help but smile at how happy they seem. Amanda heads into town for groceries, and while loading bags into her car, notices a guy stocking up on canned goods and water, like he's prepping for the end of the world. She offers him a faint smile, thinking nothing of it. Later, the family heads to the beach for some much-needed relaxation. Everything's great until they spot a massive oil tanker headed straight for shore. They barely manage to scramble out of the way in time. A cop informs them that this isn't the first tanker to go off course. There's been a series of similar incidents, and apparently, navigation systems are acting up. So much for a peaceful getaway. Back at the house, Amanda tries to make sense of what happened, but the Wi-Fi is out, and even the TV refuses to cooperate. It's like the universe really wants them to unplug. Luckily, the kids seem to have already moved on from the oil tanker scare, so no major harm done. Amanda looks out the window and spots some deer in the backyard. Clay, ever the optimist, takes it as a good omen. Later that night, with the kids fast asleep, Amanda and Clay try to wind down with a glass of wine and a game of Jenga, because nothing says relaxing like watching wooden blocks topple. Just as they're starting to chill, there's a knock at the door. Naturally, they're both startled. It's late, and who shows up unannounced in the middle of nowhere? A man at the door profusely apologizes for interrupting and introduces himself as George, the owner of the house, along with his daughter Ruth.
I'm sorry?
This is our house. I'm the George you emailed back and forth with.
Clay, being the more trusting one, invites them inside. George explains that a blackout hit the city, and since they live on the 14th floor and he has a bad knee, they decided to retreat to their country house. He's incredibly polite, almost too polite, apologizing for the inconvenience every other sentence. Meanwhile, Ruth can't help but chime in with sarcastic reminders that it is their house after all. At one point, George offers them a refund, which Amanda misinterprets as them being asked to leave. She's already mentally packing, but George clarifies, offering them a 50% refund if they're okay with him and Ruth staying in the basement. Clay, of course, is all for it, happy to make new friends. Amanda? Not so much. They step away to talk it over, and Amanda, being the more cautious one, suspects they might have some hidden agenda.
They knocked on the door in the middle of the night.
Would you rather them burst in?
They scared the shit out of me.
But Clay reassures her, trying to convince her that not everyone is out to get them. Amanda's still not totally sold, but she agrees for now. George offers Clay a drink, and the two quickly fall into a pleasant conversation. Meanwhile, Amanda's still playing detective, eyes narrowed as she watches George like a hawk. She's not exactly warming up to him, and just to be safe, asks to see his ID. George awkwardly pats his pockets, realizing he left his wallet somewhere. Not exactly comforting. Before the situation gets more awkward, the TV suddenly flickers on with a national emergency broadcast on every channel. Ruth, already frustrated about the whole basement thing, throws out a suggestion that the blackout might be part of something bigger. Clay, trying to keep things calm, proposes they all sleep on it and figure things out in the morning. Amanda's not convinced, but everyone's too tired to argue further. Ruth, still annoyed that she's stuck sleeping in the basement of her own house, vents her frustration to George. She's ready to kick the family out and reclaim her space, but George insists they need to keep reassuring them. Ruth, suspicious, throws a side eye and asks if George knows more than he's letting on. He dodges the question and the conversation dies down, but Amanda overhears Ruth's snark and is still fuming about it. She also notices there aren't any family pictures in the house, which only fuels her suspicions. Clay suggests they probably take the photos down when renting out the place. Amanda's not buying it, but they eventually crash from the long day. While they're asleep, the TV glitches again, briefly showing a news report about a cyber attack. It's just enough to raise the stakes a little higher, though no one's awake to notice. Yet, in the morning, The internet and TV are still out, and Rose won't stop complaining about missing the Friends finale. Amanda checks her phone and finds a few notifications about hackers being behind the blackout. Clay decides he'll head into town later to figure out what's going on. With the TV still a no-go, Rose sulks by the pool, only to spot the same deer from yesterday, standing there like creepy silent spectators. Amanda shares the news with George and Ruth, mentioning the hacker rumors. George, trying to keep things light, brushes it off, joking that it's probably some kids playing a prank. Ruth's more worried about her mom, who's supposed to be flying home. George does his best to reassure her, saying she's likely just fine, but the worry lingers. He decides to visit a neighbor a few miles away, just in case they know anything more about the situation. Meanwhile, Clay sets out on his own adventure, driving around without GPS and predictably getting lost. Stepping out of the car to search for a cell signal, the radio broadcasts mention the cyber attack and its ripple effects on the environment and wildlife. Back at the house, Rose tells Archie about the deer staring at her again, but he's too busy testing out his phone's camera to care. Frustrated, she decides to take matters into her own hands, dragging him into the woods to see what else might be lurking out there. After wandering for a bit, Rose keeps going on about the deer again, much to Archie's disinterest. She's clearly feeling ignored, and tells Archie that no one ever listens to her, which he casually confirms, not even trying to deny it. While heading back, Archie gets bitten by a bug, and Rose spots a house in the distance. She suggests they check it out, but Archie's stomach has other priorities, so they keep walking. Meanwhile, George arrives at the neighbor's house and checks his messages. None of them have been delivered, which finally cracks his calm facade. Turns out, he's just as worried as everyone else. As he steps out of the car, he notices luggage scattered all over the yard. Definitely not a great sign. Investigating further, he finds a satellite phone in the garage, but even that's useless. George then heads toward the beach, only to stumble upon a plane wreck, with debris and bodies strewn everywhere. Just as he's processing this grim scene, another plane zooms dangerously close overhead, forcing him to hightail it back to the house. Clay, on the other hand, is still aimlessly driving around when he spots a woman on the side of the road, frantically waving for help. Thinking he might finally catch a break, he pulls over, but the woman's rattling off in rapid Spanish, and Clay doesn't have a clue what she's saying. She's getting more panicked by the second, which freaks Clay out.
Me he desviado hace rato que estoy caminando.
Okay, I don't understand what you're saying. I don't speak Spanish.
In a moment of not so heroic decision making, he bails, leaving the poor woman behind. Not long after, a drone buzzing through the air catches his attention. Red smoke starts pouring from it, and Clay's first instinct is to get as far away as possible. But as it turns out, the smoke is just a cloud of flyers floating harmlessly down. George returns to the house and pulls Amanda aside. He starts talking about how he noticed something odd in the stock market a while ago and had a feeling something like this might happen. He explains that a satellite phone should always work, unless of course the satellites themselves are down. Amanda rolls her eyes, thinking he's getting a bit too dramatic, until George drops the bombshell about seeing a plane crash right in front of him. Before they can process any of this, distant explosions rumble through the air and a piercing noise follows.
Where are my kids?
Amanda, panicking, immediately runs outside to check on the kids. Thankfully, the noise stops after a while and she's able to reunite with them. Clay finally rolls up and shows everyone a flyer he found. Archie casually translates the Arabic as "Death to America" because he has seen it in a video game. George raises an eyebrow, questioning why they'd drop a message in a foreign language most people won't even understand. The family has officially had enough. They decide to head to Amanda's relatives, hoping it's safer there. After driving for a while with no signs of life, they hit a major roadblock, literally. Amanda steps out to investigate and quickly realizes all the wrecked cars are brand new Teslas. Then, she spots another self-driving one speeding toward them. Clay's about to flag it down, but Amanda pieces it together just in time.
What are you doing? Should we flag them down? Maybe they know something.
No one in that car!
She rushes back to their car, and they narrowly dodge the first Tesla, followed by a whole fleet of them. With no clear way out, they have no choice but to turn back and return to the house. The family is at a loss for what to do next. Clay tries to be helpful by filling the bathtub with water for drinking. Ruth offers him some vape, and they head out to the patio to chat. Clay opens up about his encounter with the woman he found stranded on the side of the road. He admits he should have helped her, but drove off in a panic. He also mentions the oil tanker that ran aground on the beach, which he hadn't shared before because he was spooked by it. Clay tries to stay positive, believing they'll make it through, but Ruth is rattled by the idea of an invasion. Their conversation is interrupted when a flock of flamingos lands in the pool, adding a surreal twist to their already strange day. Inside, Amanda and George have a heart-to-heart. They talk about their jobs, and Amanda apologizes for her initial suspicion of him. They exchange some jokes, which lightens the mood, and Amanda starts to warm up to George. She eventually asks why he really came to the house. George shares an odd story from a few years ago. One of his clients, a big-shot businessman in defense contracting, had invited him to a private event. They had a blast and got pretty drunk. The client joked about inviting George on a trip to meet his evil cabal that supposedly runs the world. George brushed it off as a joke. Then, yesterday, the same client called, asking George to move a huge amount of money, way more than usual. When George joked about the evil cabal again, the client didn't laugh. Instead, he told George to be careful. That conversation has been haunting George ever since. Amanda asks George if he's suggesting his friend is behind all this chaos. George shakes his head and explains that the whole idea of a secret cabal running the world is just a convenient excuse. The real truth is even scarier. Nobody's in control. Some powerful people get early warnings, but that's all they get, just a heads up. Amanda's not impressed by this bleak outlook and starts to lose interest in George. Trying to lighten the mood, George shows her his music collection and casually asks,
You like jazz?
Amanda's more curious about his daughter's music, so she puts on a song and they dance a bit. Afterward, George is hit with the harsh reality that he might never see his wife again, and he breaks down. Amanda comforts him as best as she can, but then that awful, high-pitched noise starts up again. As they settle down to sleep, Amanda notices Archie feels a bit warm. In the basement, Ruth asks to sleep in the bed with her, scared and unsure if they can trust anyone. Amanda's been on edge from the start, and now Archie's been sneaking pictures of her. Rose keeps staring into the woods and has a hunch that Clay wants to sleep with her. With everything falling apart, trust is hard to come by, especially when it feels like no one's got their back. They're stuck sleeping in the basement for the second night, and Amanda feels that doing the right thing might just make things worse. The next morning, Rose is missing. Amanda checks on Archie, who seems fine, until he starts casually pulling out his teeth. Yeah, apparently, his teeth just felt weird. He mentions the bug bite, and George throws out the idea that it might be Lyme disease. Since the hospital is out of reach due to the roadblock, they decide to visit that weird old man Amanda saw earlier at the supermarket. He's done some contractor work for George and isn't too far away. Clay still hasn't found Rose, so everyone pitches in to search for her. Ruth finds that one of the bikes is missing, and Archie brings up the shed they discovered. After Archie throws up some blood, they head off to check out the shed again. No sign of Rose there either. Amanda, clearly frazzled, loses her cool and snaps at Ruth. Ruth, feeling abandoned with only George around, and probably never seeing her mom again, asks why Amanda is always so angry. Amanda, who's made a career out of reading people to sell them stuff they don't need, replies that people are fundamentally awful, often without even realizing it. Ruth agrees, but points out that even if people are terrible, they're all they've got. Clay, George, and Archie arrive at the contractor's place, but Danny isn't as friendly as George hoped. Clay explains Archie's situation, and Danny starts rambling about some old microwave weapons used in Cuba that caused radiation and even made people lose their teeth. He adds that the Russians just pulled their staff from Washington, so he thinks it's all heading towards war. George begs Danny to help, but Danny's more worried about himself. He suggests trying a neighbor's house nearby that supposedly has a secret bunker and tells them to leave. George insists he's going to get Archie help, and things get tense with guns drawn. Clay pleads with Danny, stressing that Archie's their last hope. Meanwhile, Amanda steps out of the shed and starts following a bike trail. Ruth follows too, but gets surrounded by a herd of deer. The leader of the deer approaches, and Amanda, in a moment of pure desperation, starts flailing her arms and shouting to scare them away. It's a wild, goofy scene, and though the deer look unimpressed, they've seen enough and decide to leave. Amanda follows the bike trail and discovers it leads to the house Rose mentioned earlier. After Danny gives Archie the medicine, he warms up a bit. He jokingly blames the Koreans for all the chaos, but when Clay shows him the note with Arabic writing, Danny laughs it off. He mentions that a friend found a similar note, either Korean or Chinese. George thinks he's pieced it all together, With his defense sector client, he's studied military strategies extensively. He's especially scared by a 3-stage program. Stage 1 is isolation, shutting down communications and transport to leave people helpless. Stage 2 is synchronized chaos, spreading misinformation and launching covert attacks to make people turn on each other. Stage 3 is civil war, the most cost-effective way to break a country apart. Ruth and Amanda, watching from afar, are stunned as explosions tear through the city. Meanwhile, Rose is at a neighbor's house, happily snacking. She finds a bunker stocked with water, plants, and plenty of food. Best of all, a massive collection of movies and TV shows, including her favorite, Friends. Well, that's the end of this recap. Consider subscribing for more stories like this. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.